Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 22nd episode of By the Drip. This podcast is about coffee, entrepreneurship, and the amazing people we meet through the story of coffee. I'm your host, David Crosby, founder and CEO of ROSSO Coffee Roasters. Today, Paul Stevens joins me to talk about roasting coffee. Paul is the head roaster for ROSSO Coffee Roasters and has roasted coffee for the World Barista Champion in 2023 and 2024. Paul is one of the most humble, hardworking, and knowledgeable coffee professionals I know. Paul talks to us about joining the coffee industry way back in 1996. We discuss the roasting process and how Paul blends technology with art to maintain consistency and quality. Finally, he shares his experience roasting coffee for the World Barista Champions and the meticulous approach taken for competition coffees. He highlights the partnership between the roaster and the barista, providing feedback based on taste and flavor profiles. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Paul Stevens. Paul, thanks for joining me on By the Drip. Appreciate you taking the time.
I'm glad to be here.
I want to go back. I love starting at the beginning. How did you get into specialty coffee? Like we're OGs in this game, so I don't even know if it was specialty coffee then. It might have been just coffee. But how did you get into the industry?
I mean, growing up in England, coffee's not wasn't a big thing in England back then. It was all tea. I didn't drink tea or coffee in the early days until I think I tried an espresso in Spain when I was 17, traveling through Spain, and I'd never really drank coffee. And I went into this cafe, and they didn't really have espresso in England. And I got given this little small, what I thought was a tiny cup of coffee, and that was the first time I tried that. Then I didn't really drink coffee again until like my early 20s. And but my first actual job on an espresso machine was in a sandwich bar in probably 1996.
Oh, wow.
And it was a two-group Gaggia espresso machine. And we used to grind the coffee for the entire day. we would pre-grind the coffee into
speed of service.
Into a container, and then you'd scoop it into the portafilter to make a shot.
Okay, yeah.
And it was all the classic kind of layered cafe lattes in a glass, like back of a spoon kind of thing to kind of separate it, and fluffy cappuccinos, like the dry cappuccino kind of thing. So that was my first kind of introduction to.
You just needed a job at that point in time, and you just went...
Yeah, I just needed a job, and that was my first introduction to an espresso machine. So then I started playing around at home, like buying grinders and like domestic espresso machines.
And so are you drinking coffee at work at this point and enjoying it?
I'm drinking coffee. Yeah, I'm drinking coffee, yeah. So then I started playing around at home with my own espresso machine and like stovetop espressos and all those kind of things. And then in 2001, early 2001, I needed a job, and I saw this advertisement in the paper, and it said, coffee enthusiast wanted for this new cafe. And I was like, well, that sounds like me. I'm kind of into this. So this was one of the first, this is a place called Red Rooster in Brighton in England. And it was one of the first cafes to have a roaster in the cafe.
Okay.
They had a 3 kilo Diedrich roaster. So I started out just as a barista, and the boss was doing some roasting, and he was new to it. He'd only just learned how to roast. But being the boss, he's got a lot of other things, as you know, like got to do all the accounts and all that kind of stuff. So he needed somebody to take over the roasting, and I was the most kind of adept at being a barista and most into it. So I was picked to take over roasting. So that was my pathway into specialty coffee, and I've never looked back since.
So do you remember like the first coffee you ever roasted, or even that moment in time of getting on? I can think back to the first time I roasted. I was so incredibly nervous. I was, sweating profusely. I was worried I was going to burn the place down. I just
Well, I mean, there was no roasting software. There was no Cropster. You just had the one temperature readout. And we had forms to write down the temperature every minute, but no like graphing or anything like that. And the roasts were Diedrich had recommended to do like a 16-minute roast.
Okay.
Which seems quite long now. But and like not roasting that dark. And I progressively got a little bit lighter as I got more into it.
Okay.
But most of the literature you could read on roasting was about developing the coffee quite a lot.
Okay, yeah.
And there were certain things like if you got a high acid coffee, like a Kenyan, they recommended roasting it dark to kind of lower the acid, and it could handle a darker roast. That was the thinking back then.
And so how long were you there for, and how long did you roast at that company?
I was there for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
So in 2008, we upgraded to a 24 kilo roaster from the 3 kilo and had a separate roastery. So we upped production quite a lot. So that was good. Then I was no longer a barista. Before then, I was like, I'd be roasting and then I'd have to serve a customer and then go back to do some more roasting.
Oh, really? At the same time?
Yes, because the roaster was right behind the counter. So if the other baristas were like on a cigarette break or whatever, then like you'd have a customer there wanting to be served. So I'd have to be making a coffee while roasting.
Jeez. Okay. A different time and place.
Yeah. Once we upgraded, then we had like a separate roastery. So I was like hidden away down at the roastery, and I could do a deep dive into the coffee and cupping and everything. So,
and maybe talk a bit about, you said a bit about technology there. It's not a lot of technology. It's more of like a dark art back then. What would you use to help you like triangulate flavors and what was good and what was bad? And, there wasn't YouTube to like learn about roasting details.
Yeah, it was trial and error mostly because I had some old books, but there was nothing very good about modern roasting methods. I think one of the first things I found was I got the first edition of Roast magazine when that came out.
Yeah.
And there were articles in there. The first time I'd seen articles actually about like roasting to get specific flavors and things out. So that was quite interesting. Still quite tied to like traditional ways of roasting. So I wasn't using any software at that time. So I was still recording the roast temperature every minute. And I would have, I made my own sheets. So I had like one roast on one side and one roast on the other side. So I could compare and see how I was progressing, if I was on target or not.
Okay.
And then I would cup the coffees and taste them and then see how well that roast did and then adjust it. So the same as we do now, except now you have a lot more real-time information like via the roasting software.
And based on the knowledge, did you feel at the time there was like a gap in the knowledge, or it was just exciting because, anything you did, you could just taste right after and kind of like go and explore? I just remember when we first started roasting, it was like a little bit frustrating because there wasn't a lot of access to information. And we're talking like this would be 2012. I don't know. I've gone
2012.
Yeah. You know better than I do, Paul. You weren't even here and you know better. And just there wasn't a lot of access to information. People were very guarded about like how they roast coffee, other than you would go on a few coffee forums and read about, the cinnamon roast or, full city. Yeah.
It was really secretive back in the day. Like people kept their blends secret and their roasting methods if they had any, So it's definitely way better now. There's a lot more open communication and people are trying to help each other out to like achieve the best roast possible. I guess I felt like I was on like the leading edge of like trying to. There was just like it was progressing quite fast. People were starting adding new probes to the machines to different spots and things, and like challenging like previous like ideas of roasting. Like, why do we do this? Like, is this really necessary? I think things like roasters used to use the trier all the time and constantly pull the trier out to like smell the coffee and look at the coffee and see how it's progressing. And since we've had roasting software, you can see that as soon as you take that trier out, the airflow changes and it changes the dynamic of the roast. We didn't know that was happening before because you didn't have access to the live data to see what was happening.
And then the move to Canada, what kind of spurred that? And I would love to hear your history of how we connected versus how I remember it.
My partner, Emma, she's Canadian, and we met as she got a job in the UK. She came to the UK to visit her brother. She intended to stay for 2 weeks. She ended up staying for 15 years.
Okay, yeah.
So like her brother was like, well, you're not doing anything. Why not stay here? Because she had a dual citizenship, so she was allowed to stay in the UK. And so like she'd made coffee before, so she'd been coming into the cafe anyway and drinking coffee. And she came up, asked for a job, and so she became a barista, and that's how we met. So then, yeah, over the years, we decided that we would emigrate to Canada eventually. So we got the go-ahead in 2016 to move to Canada. She's from Toronto, so we moved there first. But it was a too big a city, and I knew that the coffee scene was really good in Calgary because I'd heard of different companies and things. I was like looking for jobs in Calgary, and a job came up at 8-ounce coffee.
Okay, yeah.
Like and somebody who was knowledgeable about coffee, and I'm like, well, I could do that, you know. So I applied, and when they saw my resume, they saw that I'd worked at Red Rooster in Brighton, and Wes and Jen used to live in Brighton and used to come into the cafe, and I had no idea.
Oh, wow.
Because they weren't into specialty coffee at all, other than drinking it when they used to come into the cafe in the UK, and so they instantly recognized who I was. We're like, we know this guy, and they were like, you don't want to work for us. You want to work for Rosso because their roaster's leaving, and you're a roaster. So they hooked us up, and then I remember I think we had a phone interview first.
Yeah, I think we did the phone call. I remember you being, quite quiet, and we were unsure of we were asking you some questions, and you're kind of giving us the one sentence answer, and we're like, is he nervous? Is he just not very talkative? And then Jen went to bat for you at 8 ounce, and she just said, you got to hire this guy. He is such a hard worker. He knows what he's doing. He's an amazing roaster. And then I think we brought you out, and you worked. Yeah. You worked like a couple days. Saw our massive operation, which at that time was very small. And then I guess the rest was history. Yeah,
I remember that. I remember we cupped some coffees outside.
Outside of Ramsey.
Outside of Ramsey, yeah, on a concrete block.
Oh my God, I don't remember that. Why? Because there's no room in the back.
I guess so, because I think you were in the process of moving the operation out of Ramsey, the bagging, all that kind of stuff.
And you're thinking to yourself, what a professional operation. I can't wait to work here. So you moved to Calgary, and then you got to change your roasting style a bit because you go from a Diedrich to a Probat. So maybe for listeners who don't know a lot about roasting, maybe you could talk about, I guess, heat application. Maybe you could break down just in a general sense, what is going on while you're roasting a coffee, and then how heat applies, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. Well, the first thing was moving here was the switch to Fahrenheit.
Oh, yeah.
Because
yes.
I'd done everything in Celsius. Suddenly I come here and I'm like,
what is Fahrenheit?
Having to do the conversion of what temperature is first crack and that kind of thing. So that was a big switch. But yeah, I guess a Probat is more of the roaster that you guys had was more of a traditional drum roaster where you have the gas heat source underneath of the flames, which heats the air, which is drawn through the back of the drum, and it passes through the beans. So that's how most traditional drum roasters work. The Diedrich roaster I was using uses infrared burners, so they're still gas, but they kind of heat the drum more directly from underneath. the air isn't drawn through the drum in the same kind of way. So the Diedrich was a lot more delicate. It was hard to do faster roasts. It didn't really have the power, but you could roast very small batches on a big roaster, which was good because it was so delicate, and the gas adjust and stuff was really nice on the Diedrich. It was a much finer control compared with the 12 kilo ProBat, which I came to use. So yeah, it was a step down from the 24 kilo to a 12 kilo. And I remember when we started on the Diedrich, on the ProBat, that it was underpowered. The gas was underpowered.
Yeah, definitely.
So your roasts were quite long. So I remember kind of doing some investigation and trying to up the power of the gas. And I think the principle of roasting was still the same. It's still the end result is how does the coffee taste? So no matter what roasting technology you're using, you're just adjusting it to make that coffee taste as good as you can. I think the power of the roaster was definitely different, the way that the heat applied. The Diedrich tends that the drum gets a little bit too quite hot, so you got to be way more careful about scorching the beans. They can't go in the drum too hot. So that kind of slowed the roast down on the Diedrich, I found, that I had to be a lot more gentle with it. And I found with the ProBat that because the drum was so heavy that I never had scorching at all. Sorry, my throat. But I never had scorching at all. Like, you could apply way more heat.
And so someone's listening, what is scorching?
So scorching is like the surface of the drum gets hot. So it's like a cast iron frying pan or something. And if you put something in too hot, it's just those beans will burn on the edges. So you'll get parts of those beans won't roast evenly. They'll be too burnt. So you get like flavors in the background when you're tasting that coffee of like ash and burnt flavors.
And you can physically see it on the beans for the most part.
You can see them on, yeah. So that they call it like tipping and facing, are the two terms for those scorch marks on the coffee.
So you obviously got to make some changes based on coming here, working on the ProBat. If I'm a roaster and listening, do you like one machine over the other? Or is it more you can make amazing coffee on any machine, you just got to use your tools, I guess, in the right way?
I think it's getting to know your machine. If the machine's really, really bad, really badly designed, then I don't think there's much you can do with it. But we used that little Primo roaster to win Barista Championships with. And that thing it wasn't high tech.
Yeah.
We had to do a lot of like playing it by ear on that roaster, but we still got good results out of it. So yeah, the other thing was I didn't use Cropster, didn't use the roasting software in the UK. So that was a big shift coming to Calgary and using the ProBat. I think you guys were fairly new to Cropster as well at that point.
Yeah.
I can't remember which roast I came in at. It was in the hundreds.
Oh, wow, really?
I think so, yeah. And now we're on
like 50,000.
48,000 something, yeah.
You put a lot of time on those different roasters.
Yeah.
So as a roaster, what does your day look like? What does a roaster do? You know, I've been wondering that for about a decade, Paul. What does a roaster do?
Well, I guess first, the roaster takes a bit of time to heat up. So first thing you come in, you switch everything on, and you got to wait for that roaster to heat up. We take about an hour to heat the roaster up because you got to wait for all the external metal and everything to heat up, and it stabilizes the temperature. Like if you just switch the roaster on and crank it up and throw coffee in straight away, it's not going to roast in the same way. So you've got to make sure the roaster is up to temperature and stable. So while the roaster is heating up, then you can check to see the schedule, how many roasts you need, like what the team on the ordering side, like how many orders they have and how much coffee they need. So you need to stage all the green as well. So if you're making blends, then you either need to pre-blend them or you need to dose them out in the individual amounts. And so we weigh everything out to exact number of pounds. That's another switch, a switch from kilos to pounds. And then, you get all your coffees all lined up. So then you can start roasting. So each roast takes, on average, around 9 minutes, our roasts are. And we try and roast pretty much back to back because it keeps the roaster nice and warm and keeps everything consistent. So while you're roasting, you can't really do a huge amount of anything else. You got to focus on the roasting and adjusting temperatures and the airflows and everything as you go along. And then other than roasting, then we're doing tasting. So like cupping the production every few days. So you have all the coffees lined up. And then, especially using the roasting software, we have a record of every single roast we do so that we can check. So what happened? Why does this one taste so much better? And what happened to this roast? Why does this one not taste as good? And sometimes it's a real deep dive looking at the data, because sometimes there won't be many differences between them. You see, what did we do differently? And you see that maybe the airflow was slightly different for a certain stage of the roast, which can lead to different development, different flavors. And then there's a lot of maintenance with a roaster. That's like I'm pretty hands-on with kind of getting inside the machine and stripping it down and cleaning it and adjusting things. And it's something that you've got to be able to do maintenance on the roaster. So I find that you always have to have time to either clean and to tighten things up, grease things, to keep that roaster running.
Sounds pretty simple. So when you're roasting the actual roast going on, maybe run us through a roast. So I'm a coffee lover listening to this, and I've never seen someone, roast coffee before.
Like I said, you heat the roaster up. So you have a set temperature that you've worked out is the best temperature to load that batch of coffee in. So let's say we've got a temperature of 430 degrees Fahrenheit. You've got this big mass of room temperature green beans. So you throw those into the roaster. So immediately the temperature in the roaster goes right down. So you'll see the graph plummet right down. And then it's going to start climbing up again. So then what that roaster is going to do is it's going to try and get those green beans to the temperature of the drum. So what you're going to see is that graph slowly, the bean temperature slowly rise, as well as the drum temperature is going to rise. And what you want to do is like faster at the beginning, and then you're like slowly slowing the gas down throughout the roast. So you'll see like a nice smooth curve of the temperature going up like sharply initially, and then slowly, like it's almost like bringing something to a boil and then simmering it.
Okay.
So the goal is you get to a point that's called first crack, which we currently get at about 385 degrees Fahrenheit. And you'll actually hear an audible like popping sound, and that's each of the beans. They're kind of doing like little explosions as they're opening up, and all the gas and moisture is releasing all at once. So you get this like cracking sound. That's kind of the minimum that you can roast a coffee to. From there onwards, that dictates how dark that coffee is going to be and how much development you have. So that's like a key indicator that you can use to know how dark that coffee is going to be. So from there on, you're recording what they call the development time. So say it's like 0 at when you first hear that crack, then you're aiming for anywhere really between kind of 1 and like 3 minutes development. So 3 minutes would be like a pretty dark coffee for us. Like we generally go with like 1.5 to 2 for like a lighter coffee, and then 2.5, like 3 for darker coffees. Once you've reached the end temperature and like the development that you want, then you want to finish that coffee, like stop it from roasting like as quickly as you can. So it empties from the drum and into the cooling bin. So the cooling bin has a high-powered fan sucking cold air through. So it will cool it down in like, ours takes about 3 minutes, and it can stop that coffee from roasting. So it kind of captures it at that point that you want it, the level of the degree of darkness. And then we have a machine to measure how dark the coffee is. Like, again, I used to just like kind of look at the coffee and see how dark it is. And by tasting it, and it would be like, oh, this is a light. And I think you said before they had all these terms like city and full city and French roast and all those kind of things, which were kind of, you used to be able to get like color tiles. You could like look almost like paint samples.
So you'd hold it up to like the roasted coffee and try to like match the color. Yeah,
you'd use like a daylight bulb, and you'd have them underneath, and you say, I think this is. Now we use a machine. We use a color track. So we grind a small sample of each roast. You put it in. It fires a laser. Takes like 50,000 readings or something over a 30-second period, and then it gives you an average, and then we get given a number, and that number correlates to how dark the coffee is. So say like 50 is a light roast, and then 65 would be a darker roast. So that's something we can use to track. So if we're aiming for 55 on that roast, and then we do another roast and it's getting a bit dark, like 56 or something, then we'll adjust it the next time to make sure that we hit that 55. So that's another, I think all these tools are really useful to maintain quality and to track it. It's much easier to track if you have exact measurements like that you can look back on and see how to adjust.
So we have a few other tools in the roastery that you use to help kind of consistency and quality. Do you want to talk maybe about the Sovda and what those do?
Yeah. When did we get those now? That was a few years ago.
2021?
Yeah.
I don't know. No, it's post-COVID or somewhere during COVID. Yeah.
So we always recognize the fact that in green and roasted coffee that there were defects.
And when you say defects, my mom hears that and she's like, "Oh my God, there's defects. Like, I'm not drinking coffee anymore." What is a defect?
So like in the green coffee that you might get beans that have been damaged, so like broken, and then they start to you might get like brown spots and things on them where they've like started going bad or things. And when the coffee is in the drying beds and things, sometimes there'll be ones on the edge that don't dry properly and things like that. So you get a lot of variation. There might be some cherries that weren't ripe, and so there won't be a fully developed bean inside. And often at the farms and things, they'll be sorting out some of these, but they won't be sorting to the kind of levels that we want to sort to. So what we used to do was kind of I'd have a quick look through, which you can do if you're doing smaller batches. If you're roasting on a 3 kilo or a 12 kilo, there's a chance you can look through that little batch and pick out some things before you roast. And then once the roast is finished, then you might get, again, beans which are like scorched, or you might get ones which we call like Quakers, which are pale, that those beans didn't have enough sugars. So it's the sugars in the bean that make the bean go brown. They like caramelize. So sometimes you get beans that don't have enough sugars, so they'll be really pale and they won't develop proper flavors. So we can pull those out. So we used to, when the coffee was in the cooling bin, you'd see them go around and then you'd be like picking them out.
You're hand picking them out at that time.
You're hand picking them out, as many as you can, But then, once production goes up and you get busier, and then we move to a 45 kilo roaster, it's like, I can't be picking beans out of that much coffee when I've got to get the next roast in. So we thought about getting these sorters for quite a while, and then we eventually did. So they're from the brand Sovda, and they're called Pearls. And we have two of them. We have one for the green and one for the roasted. So before we roast, this machine has like 2 electronic eyes. So you can pass the coffee through, and you can program it to be more sensitive to picking out different things like black spots or like bits of different colors, like red and things. So you can choose how much you want to take out. And then the same on the roasted side. Once you roasted it, it'll take out all those pale beans. It'll take out any darker beans. Anything like a rock or something that looks a different color, it'll take that out. So, and it's way quicker than I could do and way more efficient. It definitely makes a difference. Like we cup those coffees, like leaving those defects in and like taking them out, and it makes a huge difference to the quality and the consistency of the coffee.
And on the green side, do you find it's easier to roast when the green's been sorted? Because last year I've been on the road a bunch, and people have been asking, like, why do you sort your green? Are you using lower quality green?
I think that like even the highest quality green has variation, and like things are going to get through. And people are always in the business of selling coffee by weight, so you don't want to lose too much weight. You don't want to throw all that coffee away. So I think consistency. Like sometimes some of those beans might not have been that bad flavor wise, but they will roast differently. So taking some of those out makes it more consistent. And I find that there are defects in the green which might not show up once it's roasted. So having it taken out first is beneficial. There's also like another advantage in that we're loading them into a hopper and it's being vacuumed up into the sorting machine. And the process of doing that extracts a lot of dust from the coffee. And we have a vacuum that collects all the dust. And there's quite a lot of dust collected and like fibers from the burlap and things. which would normally be going into the roaster, but we're removing all that first. So it makes the coffee cleaner. So we're kind of like dusting the coffee off before it goes in the machine.
Yeah, it's all these little 1% improvements that lead to, I guess, coffees that have won the World Barista Championship.
Yeah, like you can't take a really low grade coffee and then clean it and make it into a fantastic coffee. That's not going to happen. But you can improve a good coffee to make it even better.
Yeah, I think you remove kind of the low points of the coffee, and make it more consistent. Than you're not taking an 82-point coffee and turning it into 86. You're taking an 82-point coffee and there's no cups coming out of there that are going to taste like 80-point. I think that's
and there's always a chance that a bad defect is going to be in a bag of really good coffee, and we want every customer to have a good experience, and all it takes is one of those defects to be in your shot of espresso in the morning, and that coffee's going to taste bad. So if we can minimize that, try and get all those beans out, then that's our goal.
I highlighted there, Paul. You've roasted a lot of coffee at Rosso in the last, I guess, almost 10 years. You've roasted coffee for the World Barista Champion in 2023. So you roasted all the coffee for Boram. This year, for 2024, you roasted the espresso for the World Barista Champion. The Canadian Barista Champion, you roasted Nelson's coffee. You've roasted Cole's coffees for all the times he's competed in the World Barista Championship. So you've been to the mountaintop on, other than competing in the championship, roasting championship yourself. Your coffees have won and been the gold standard. Could you walk us through maybe what do you do with a coffee that's going to go into a competition and what your mindset is? And I guess you're also roasting not on a pro bat. You're roasting on a different type of machine at a much smaller amount.
Yeah, I mean, first up, we're buying the best coffees in the world to use for these for the competitions. They're often processed in extraordinary ways, so the coffees are quite different to start with. I think it's really good to focus intensely on making a perfect shots of espresso, perfect coffee. So I'm usually sorting those by hand because the batches are so small anyway, and I want to be really critical of taking out the green and then roasting it. And I think consistency is key as well for barista competitions. Each one of those shots doesn't have to just taste good, but they all have to be identical so that every judge gets the same flavors, and that those flavors correlate to what you as a barista are telling them that they should be tasting. And it's a real partnership between the barista and the roaster. You get lots of feedback about which batches tasted a certain way, and then I can adjust them. You don't normally get so much feedback from a barista in terms of exact what they're looking for and how you can get that out of the coffee.
And feedback, they would be saying oh, could we get a bit more sweetness, or the acidity is a bit sharp. Could we change that?
Yeah, and certain flavors came out from this one has got too much grapefruit is coming through from these particular batches, and also resting periods as well. So we've often been told exactly when we have to roast. We've got to roast a batch on this day so we can rest for this many days, and then we'll do the second batch on this day. So it's a real coordinated effort between the barista and the coaches and the roaster. And it's great to have coffee that you've roasted on the world stage being used. I don't really want to go up in front of the cameras and do that whole thing, but I'm glad that other people want to do it, and I can support them doing it.
Paul, you're next. Come on. You don't have to do barista. You should do, Canada's got to get a roasting championship, but
yeah, I might consider the roasting championship.
We're signing you up. The second it's here in Canada, we're signing you up.
I think the Barista Championship has done a lot to progress specialty coffee and drive the technology, and the standard is just I remember going to the first Barista Championship back in 2003 or something.
Oh, wow.
And it was quite different back then.
They're smoking cigarettes. The judges could smoke.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, and wasn't really, and it was people using blends. There was no talk of the farm or the specific coffee they were using. It was almost like cocktail kind of waiters. You know?
Right.
That was the kind of the way it kind of seemed back then.
On our tour overseas, tons of people were fascinated about, where was the championship coffee roasted? How was it roasted? Every little detail about time and temperature, and they want to recreate that roast, which we would advise them. It's more about finding the roast that works best for you. But yeah, can you talk about roasting on the Stronghold and how that's different?
So we have a Stronghold S7. We can do batches of like 800 grams on there. So we often do batches of 800 grams or 400 grams. 800 grams or 500 grams. So that's much smaller. And it's a fully electric roaster, so it doesn't use any gas. The Stronghold has 2 heat sources. So it has hot air, so similar to like a popcorn maker, something like that. So it has an element that heats the air. And it also has a halogen heat source, which is like a really hot light bulb. And they both provide different kinds of heat to the coffee. And you can adjust both of them independently to achieve the kind of the roast you want. So there are a lot of variables you can play with those 2 heat sources. So I've developed my own kind of profiles based upon how they taste. Essentially, I'm lowering both of them like one at a time, like throughout the roast, kind of trying to mimic what would happen in a traditional roaster. A traditional roaster, you have the hot air coming through, but you also have the heat radiating from the drum. So I see that the halogen is kind of mimicking the heat from the drum, and the hot air is the same on both. And I find the results really good on the Stronghold. Better than other hot air roasters which just use hot air. I find having that halogen is giving more of the same qualities that you'd find in a drum roaster. In terms of roasting times, they're still fairly similar, maybe a little bit quicker, maybe 7 to 8 minutes. And we have installed our own probe, so we could use the same Cropster roasting software that we're using on the big roaster. And again, it's much more sensitive than the built-in software on the roaster. So we can see like much more accurately what's happening to the coffee in the roaster. And then we can recreate that roast exactly. Once we've hit upon the roast that the barista wants, then we can recreate that roast identically. And the Stronghold is really good at maintaining consistency because it has a very good between batch protocol of heating up the roaster and the drum walls to make it exactly the same both times. So I find that the consistency is really good.
Do you ever get nervous roasting those competition batches?
I used to.
Now you're just ice cold.
I remember the first time when we were using the 12 kilo Pro Bat, and then we had the small Primo roaster. I think it was probably La Palma Ale Toucan that I remember you and Cole brought some of this coffee back. And I'm like, how much did this cost? And so there was this it was about the money more than anything. I think just like how much money am I putting into this roaster? And if I screw this up, that's a lot of money wasted, So I remember the first times using those coffees, it was kind of like pouring gold into the roaster. But yeah, the more I've roasted it, I'm not as nervous about it. I'm kind of more used to those coffees now. You still want to do a really good job. Unless something goes really wrong, it's not going to be completely wasted. Like there's always insights to be learned from a roast, even if it comes out bad. You taste it, you know what to do next time. Sometimes with some of the more exotically fermented coffees and things, they can behave quite strangely in the roaster. And you're never quite sure how they're going to behave until you throw them in.
And when you say exotic, what kind of coffees? Like heavily processed or like infused?
Yeah, when they're now they're fermenting coffee for like several days, or they're doing different like anaerobics and trying them out, putting them in barrels and bury them in the ground, and so it can really affect the way that they roast. And so it's a bit of a challenge because those are the kinds of coffees that people are using for competitions and things.
So Paul, I got confused with you a little bit on the trip the 100 Days with Boram, people kept on saying to me that I was the roaster, and I kept on saying, I am not the roaster. Paul back home is the roaster. And I'd get these questions. So I'm gonna pass on the questions that I was getting while on the road, and I wouldn't be able to answer them. And I need you to answer some of these questions. So one of the biggest ones from coffee professionals was asking what piece of equipment should they buy the roasting right now, but what's the next piece of equipment they should buy to help improve either quality, consistency. If they have a small roastery, they got X roaster, what would you recommend?
I mean, I'm assuming that most people are going to be using some kind of software like Cropster or something, which I think is key to recording everything you do. And so you can see what you've done and how to improve and how to replicate those things. Also making sure, like, if you do use that, but you're trying to make sure that you have good probes, like really sensitive probes, and in the right places in the roaster to make sure that you're getting the best data possible at the most different points in the roaster. I find that really helps.
So they would be installing those themselves?
If the roaster doesn't have them, like if you're choosing a roaster, try and find one that has all the probes installed. But sometimes we install extra ones on the 12 kilo probe app, and it made a big difference. I found that you almost had like a prediction. You could see that because if you're just measuring the bean temperature, once the bean temperature starts flicking up, then it's kind of too late, but you didn't know that it was going to happen until next time you roast. You can kind of predict it. But if you're measuring the environment temperature, I find that you'd see the environment temperature climb before the bean temperature. So you can use that as a predictor. So having that extra probe in there makes a big difference. Some kind of like color track or Agtron or something to accurately measure how dark you roasted that coffee. I found that really useful. And you can, once you've hit up on a color that you really like, then you can make sure that you're hitting that color each time. If you're roasting like small roasts, then I don't think you need sorters. I think you can still do it by hand. But if you're roasting big quantities of coffee, then I think the color sorters really help to improve the quality and make sure that you've got more consistency. But the best tool, I think, is your taste buds, really. It's like attention to detail and then tasting the coffee. Like you can't improve unless you're tasting those coffees and like making accurate notes and correlating that with the roasts and what you've done to the roasts. It's all, yeah, I think people didn't used to record any data and stuff. They would just like wing it each time and like, oh, this roast turned out good. And then the next one's like, yeah, don't know what happened with that one. Never mind. Oh.
Roast the next one.
But they wouldn't know why. They wouldn't know what happened,
Okay, so detailed notes. You kind of listeners got 4 or 5 answers there. So those are kind of similar to what I said. So I'm glad I was channeling you on that question. What about?
Yeah, I think there are more tools for baristas and brewers than there are for roasters.
Yeah, well, if we could only get another YouTube grinder review video, right? we need another one. Another question we got a lot was, I'm a barista. I don't know if I like roasting, but I want to try it. What kind of personality type, what things should you enjoy doing as a roaster that your day in and day out is going to look like?
I think attention to detail and focus is something you need. You can't just really just walk away and ignore it. It's something you've got to stay focused on. If you become a production roaster, then there's a lot of repetition, especially if you've hit upon a roast that is already good. You're not going to change it. You're not going to improve it. You've just got to match that roast. So I feel that can be a little bit, not everybody wants to do that. You can't talk to people very, very much when you're deep in the roasting. People always come and try and ask you questions, and you're at a critical point in the roast, and you just have to be kind of rude.
I'm so sorry, Paul. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it can be quite solitary sometimes. If you're the person who just likes to chat and have communication with people all the time, then it's maybe not the ideal career for you. I mean, I spent 7 years on my own in a roastery. So
oh my God, Paul.
I was doing the roasting and the bagging and everything. And so there was no
No chit chat.
no team, that like the cafe was full of people, and I would like go in there to deliver the coffee to them and then to the roastery. But I quite enjoy that because then you can really focus and then like do focused cuppings and then like, yeah. So, and I guess it's not you don't get like instant results. So like you're roasting a batch, you've got to wait till the next day or so before you can cup that and like see how that is. Whereas like if you're brewing a coffee, that takes a few minutes and you can try and go, yeah, that's not right, I'll change it. And it's much quicker. It's a much quicker process of like trying things out. And, whereas the roaster is like, I'll try this out and then tomorrow I'll taste it and then roast it again. And then it's a much slower process.
So patience. You need patience, attention to detail, enjoying, I don't know, being alone or working in your own head.
Enjoying your own thoughts.
Enjoying your own thoughts.
Yeah, ideally you've got to have some kind of mechanical mind to know what's happening with the roaster. There's always something like I find my ears are attuned to like different noises. Like I'll hear like that motor sounds slightly different, or there's a slight scraping, or there's like you're always on the lookout to kind of keep the engine running good,
If I'm a consumer and I'm looking at roasted coffee, we talked a little bit about, tipping or facing where we're seeing, like maybe burnt or scorched parts on the beans. Is there anything else that I can identify as a consumer? I don't have, a fancy machine that's telling me the color or anything like that, but what would you recommend I can look for? Or is there nothing as a consumer? It's like, if it's a light hue of brown, then that means it's lightly roasted. If it's a really dark hue of brown with lots of oil, that's dark.
Yeah, I guess it partly depends on the coffee. So like a washed coffee should be nice and even. There shouldn't be much variation in color. So if you're buying a nice washed Guatemalan or something, then that should be like really consistent. You should be able to look at those beans and they should be quite a uniform color. Some of the like more naturals and fermented coffees, there will be variation in those. Like you'll expect there to be variation, and that adds to the complexity of the flavors. That some of those beans will taste different to others, but still within that you want like no real like super light beans or really dark oily beans. And then the oils in general, like depending on the style you want, if you want really dark coffee, then you're going to get oils, because what happens is that in a coffee bean, the oils are all like kind of trapped in individual cells in the structure of the bean. And as you roast the coffee, that structure can get broken down. But generally, if you're roasting light or medium dark, all those oils are still trapped within that bean. So the beans will be dry on the outside. But then over time, as the coffee ages, as it gets old, those oils will slowly migrate to the surface. So if you see the beans looking a bit oily, that means they're probably getting old. If the coffee's been roasted too quickly, then you might see like some scorching on there. You might see a lot of like oils, and some of them, like some will be much darker than others. That leads to it being like uneven. The coffee's uneven. It might have been roasted a bit too fast. I guess it also depends on the taste. But like, I guess if you're choosing coffee before you've tasted it, but we don't often get the chance to look at a coffee. If it's sealed in a bag, you just got to go on
full send just
on
buy
how
it
looks. Yeah. If it's got a good picture on it, then buy
it. Paul, what are you excited for in the next year here? What's we just got done all the competitions. So you were roasting a lot of coffee for a lot of competitors in the last year. We're probably on a break for a while here. So what's on your horizon? What's getting you excited about coffee roasting? Anything new?
With our facility, I'm looking forward to we're getting a silo, which is made by Softer, the same people that make our sorters. So it's a brand new silo that they've developed, because we have to sort all the coffees. We're putting them into bins already weighed out in like 88-pound batches. And we've got huge floor space devoted to all these big brute bins full of coffee. So when we get the silo, we'll be able to load all the sorted coffee into the silo. And it has 8 different chambers, and they all have scales built in. So we can track exactly how much is in each of those. And when we go to roast, we want 88 pounds of this coffee. We can just push a button and it will send that coffee to the roaster without us having to weigh it and pre-batch it out. So that'll be really good for our production. Looking forward to that. It's a pretty cool looking thing. It kind of looks like a spaceship. landing in your roastery. It's got all these legs and things. It looks pretty good. So I guess I'm excited for that. We have some new coffees coming in from some new producers in Guatemala and Colombia as well. So I'm looking forward to those containers coming in. It's always good to get new coffees.
It always is. We've had too many small batch comp coffees, so it's good to bring in some of the everyday drinkers, our daily driver, as some people would say.
Yeah, it's always really interesting to try the high-end specialty ones, the different processes that people are trying out. It's always interesting to see what flavors we're getting out of those coffees. And I think that I love the experimentation that a lot of these farmers are doing now. They're trying everything, all kinds of different. You'll have all the same coffee, but processed, this many days, this many hours at this temperature. And it's really interesting how much data that they're tracking as well.
Yeah, we're finally seeing the data kind of go through the whole from seed to cup, where I think it was only in certain parts we focused on it. And now the more data our whole industry has, I think it's better for us. So we have better understanding of what's, the cause and effect.
Yeah, I mean, like everything, you've got growing the coffee in the first place, and then harvesting it, and then processing it, and then storage, shipping it, and roasting it, and then down to the barista. Yeah, there's so many steps in that process.
Let's talk about you personally. What does rest look like for you? What do you do when you leave work? What do you do to relax, recharge? You don't want to answer? You don't have to answer, Paul.
The work starts when I get home.
Yeah, here's easy.
Yeah, I still have I have 4 children, but most of them are grown up. But I have one 10-year-old left who's they tend to destroy the house quicker than you can tidy it. I don't quite understand how they manage that, but there always seems to be so much work to do, and I love cooking as well, and that's probably got me into coffee. Really, was that I enjoyed cooking. Is that idea of transforming a raw ingredient into something that tastes really good that people enjoy. So yeah, I cook for my family. I love to do that. So when I get home from work, I'm straight to the kitchen and I start cooking. I maybe have a little power nap before. I'm the master of a power nap.
Yeah.
I can do a 10-minute nap.
A 10-minute nap.
It recharges me. Or you can do the coffee nap. Drink a coffee, then nap for 10 minutes, and then you wake up and you're caffeinated and
you're good to go.
That's a good one. I'm a bit of a tinkerer as well. I like that as downtime, like fixing things and doing mechanical things. That I find that it's a good way, like focusing your mind on one little thing, like nothing else matters at that point other than trying to fix this little thing, So I quite enjoy that. We've just got a community garden plot as well, so we've been growing a lot of vegetables and things recently. So that's pretty good.
You gotta come over to our house. We got this big garden, and we just have no idea what we're doing. One of these weekends, Paul, come on by.
Yeah.
We have no idea. We don't know if we're pulling out weeds or plants or vice versa. It's tough.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time.
It takes so much time. And now, we walk around the neighborhood and we see a nice garden. Now we can appreciate it. Before we moved into this house, we're like, oh, gardens, what a waste of time. They're kind of silly. They're not that hard to do. And then the second year gardening, you're like, oh my God, this is so hard. Keeping the weeds out, knowing what to pull and not to pull. It's a full-time job.
And the climate in Calgary is crazy as well. Like the spring is so short. Like you come here and it's like, oh, you shouldn't plant things before May long, because and then it's going to snow in September. So I find you've got this window. If you blink, you miss it. So people as soon as it's ready, people
go
all guns blazing. They get those plants in the ground, and you've got to be on it. Otherwise, you kind of miss the boat.
Yeah.
Whereas I find in kind of England, you can stick things in March, and you got this long spring. It's like a slow burner, Whereas here, yeah, you've got to be on it.
It's like a roast, hot and fast. Let's go. Hot, fast, full send.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul, I really appreciate you taking the time. You are,
no problem.
In my heart, you are the greatest roaster of all time. That may hurt some feelings out there, but I think you do day in and day out. You just do such an amazing job. We appreciate all the things you said, attention to detail. You're locked in while you're roasting, your appreciation from like seed to cup as a coffee professional, I think is second to none. And yeah, just so happy that we got to travel the world last year and so many people tasted your roasts and just had amazing compliments on how you roast the coffee. And yeah, you roasting coffee for the last 2 World Barista Champions. You've roasted coffee for lots of competitors over the years that have done very, very well. It's it's just an honor to be working beside you and watching you master your craft for the last while here. So everyone, not just myself, everyone at Rosso really appreciates you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And like, I appreciate you giving me the space to do it in, and to have that role in the company.
Anytime.
Really, yeah. It's a great place to work. I don't know what I'd be doing if I didn't do coffee. So
that's what I say to myself every day too.
It's been 20 years now. So like, I'm just, more than 20 years.
Wow.
Like 23 years of roasting.
Wow.
So.
Well, when we hit 25, we'll have to celebrate with something big.
Silver Jubilee.
Silver Jubilee. There's something very British.
Yes.
Okay, Paul, really appreciate it. And
okay, thanks, Dave.
We'll see you in a second.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Hey, look at that. You've made it. Thanks for listening to By the Drip. If you could please subscribe, rate, and give us a comment, that'd mean the world to me. Till next time.